Welcome to Fathers and Perinatal Loss, a webinar series that explores the unique and often overlooked experiences of fathers who have faced the profound and heart-wrenching experience of losing an infant. Perinatal loss, which includes stillbirth, miscarriage, neonatal death, and other forms of pregnancy-related loss, can leave fathers navigating a complex landscape of emotions, from sorrow and guilt to confusion and isolation. Their experiences are vital in the healing process for both themselves and their families. Our hope is that through these conversations, fathers, families, and professionals can gain a deeper understanding of the unique challenges fathers face and find support and solace in the stories of others who have walked a similar path.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope the week has been productive and the day not too painful thus far. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Matthew Sklar, and the co-presenter and good friend is Simon Hindle. Last week we did discuss naivety, and today we're going to move into the next stage of our 6-series seminar on getting the news. So at this point, we'll cover kind of the first few hours of finding out that we have lost our daughters. For those that joined last week, thank you again for coming back. And to anyone new, we're happy to have you. And hopefully our stories and insight will help you care for our community. Again, my name is Matthew Sklar. I'm from Philadelphia. My first daughter, Maya Dillon, was stillborn March 1st of 2019. So we're about 4 years or so out. We do have a rainbow baby, Mila, who's 2.5. And our story simply is my wife felt decreased movement, and over the next few days, we didn't think much of it as first-time parents. Only to get the news is where we'll dive in today, but I'll share more of that after. But I just wanted to give a quick recap and a quick intro for those that weren't here. Simon.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending and sharing in this. I'm Simon Hindle. Our first daughter, Charlotte, was stillborn in June 2019 after 37 weeks and 2 days. We have a rainbow puppy and a rainbow baby since then. With respect to, what happened, we had a few visits where there was concern about no movement, until eventually we had a visit at 37 weeks, 2 days, and there was no movement and no heartbeat. And at that point, we never got any answers. We don't know why, despite numerous tests and an autopsy. We had everything supposedly that was in good condition, so to speak, everything except life itself, which was the devastating part. As you can guess from my accent, I'm not from these parts. I'm from Manchester, England, but I've been in the Philadelphia region for the past 16 years, and now currently find myself as a volunteer for the Unite charity, which helps with stillbirths and baby losses, and that's how Matt and I first came around to meeting. As Matt said, today the session is about getting the news, finding out what's happened, and then the first few hours and decision making that takes place thereafter that. Last week we covered the fairy tales and naivete, and the next few weeks we'll be covering the labor and delivery, the process and medical aspects of birthing, the unfortunate decisions that have to be made in terms of treatment of remains and social health care and pictures, then creating memories, leaving an empty car seat in terms of leaving the hospital, and the subsequent support that we needed after that, and then the final session trying again and associated PTSD. I mention all those sessions just to show you that we do have that, as Kathy pointed out, we do have that path, and there may be some questions which we'll say we'll cover that in future sessions, but we'll try and cover all the questions that come up as they arise.
Thanks,
To you,
Simon.
Matt.
So, as first-time parents, you never think that childbirth is or being pregnant is going to end in stillbirth or the loss of your baby. But we have found out the hard way that that is absolutely an outcome that can happen, and no one is above that. There's no rhyme or reason why, and you know, as Simon and I we're just unfortunately unlucky as we've not gotten any medical answers into why both of our daughters passed. But my wife and I, you know, after doing a kick count, not feeling any, you know, movement, my wife, you know, said we have to go to the hospital, and we rushed over, and being as naive as we were, we didn't even pack a bag. We went to the hospital after doing a kick count, not feeling any kicks for an hour, being worried for a couple days, assuming that everything would still be fine and we would, you know, be sent home. Obviously that was not the case. We heard the words, "I'm really sorry. I'm not saying what I want to." I knew it was coming after 3 doctors, you know, had come in and verified and checked. It didn't take long for me to know. After the first, you know, doctor couldn't find the heartbeat. I'd been to enough ultrasounds to know we were headed this road, but didn't think I'd hear those words. And that's when, you know, your whole world is flipped upside down. Like I said, being naive, like we didn't even plan. And here we are facing, you know, we have to now deliver the baby. You know, it doesn't magically disappear as many people outside our community in the medical profession. You know, a lot of our friends didn't even realize being 34 weeks, what that meant, that we would have to give birth. And that's where decision making comes in, while you are now trying to process this overwhelming information that you are, you know, beside yourself as a father and a husband, trying to console your wife and be strong, but you yourself are broken, and now you have to make medical decisions that you never thought you would ever be faced with. So that naivety that we talked about last week is absolutely, you know, in front of you right now, and working through that. And what do you do? And the doctors are giving you information, and all you want to do is curl up in a ball and cry, which we did. And now we have to go through the process, you know, to make decisions. Our doctor laid out that, you know, we could have a C-section or vaginal, and, you know, we're like, oh my God, it's 8 o'clock at night. We have no bags. We haven't told our parents. What do we like? We have to do this now. And they're like, we'll give you time, but we're going to start the process when you're ready. I think Simon's story might be a little different, and I'll let him kind of pitch in, and we'll ping pong back and forth in the process. But it's amazing, as first time parents, you don't think about these things, and then you are faced with them. And that's why we're advocates of not beating that dead horse that this can happen and when you're planning and providing medical guidance, but it's things like we weren't prepared for and never even thought of. So that's why, you know, I personally feel like in the medical world, we need to be aware that this is an outcome, and, you know, things we can do to help, but obviously not scare us as first time parents. But Simon, if you want to jump in with, you know, your first, you know, hour or so.
Thank you, Matt. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, thank you. I share a similar story in that, you know, when I turned up to the hospital, it was as a result of that naivete of my wife saying everything will be okay. I don't feel any movement. I'm just going to do a quick check-in at the, you know, at the hospital before I head off to work. So we didn't have anything packed apart from laptops and, you know, what we needed for our working day. When I got the news, it was the first appointment I'd ever not gone to with April. So I was in the office when I got the text saying you need to come now, and there was all that fear and apprehension that came out during that Uber ride, taxi drive to the hospital. But I remember walking into the room, and if there was any kind of misgivings with regards to, you know, oh, maybe it won't be so bad when I get there, maybe I'm imagining the worst. As soon as I walk into the room and I see April in floods of tears, you know that the world has changed beyond any kind of comprehension at that point. And, you know, one of her first words to me was, "I'm so sorry, you know, we've lost her." And, you know, as if it was her fault. And it was, and we've never laid any blame, but we've always been very, you know, gone through the guilt mill, so to speak, in terms of what did we do? What did I do? Did I handle chemicals? And, you know, and I shouldn't have let April get too close to them and things like that. But at that point where you're getting that news and the doctor says, "I'm so sorry," as Matt has described before, "I'm so sorry, we're just not seeing what we want to be seeing." That's in those first few hours. That's when I think my you know, my recollection of things becomes a little bit more vague, and it's just because of the shock of that initial piece of news. Matt mentioned just now that, you know, they were talking about starting the process, you know, a 30-hour process to you know, to start that birthing of the stillborn baby. For us, we were given the option, you don't have to do this now, you can go home, you know, and come back in a day or two, which seemed equally challenging for us, just in terms of what we're going to go away and stew on this. But at the same time, I don't know how helpful that would have been. But at that point, we just wanted to get it over and done with. And then when they said, okay, well, we're going to take you up to the labor and delivery, you need to make a decision as to whether or not you want a cesarean or you're going to do a natural vaginal birth. And it was at that point where, if I was already naive, you know, my reaction was, holy cow, we've just been told that we've lost our baby and now we have to go through this whole process. Which my wife, you know, quite comically responded, well, how do you think it's going to, you know, how do you think it's going to come out if we don't do that? It doesn't magically disappear. And the thought of going through that pain of getting the news and then having to go through that extended process just felt like torture. It was just twisting the knife, having had, you know, that news. So that was difficult. But we made the decision to stay, and that's when they started to put in motion the changes for us to go up to the labor and delivery room. And at that point, we were in Abington, and they had a separate room that was away from a lot of other rooms where there was a lot of baby noises in labor and delivery. They were very thoughtful and put us in a location that was far away from that. I don't know what your experience of that was, yeah, Matt, in terms of where they were locating you.
So we were at Lankenau, and the team there was wonderful in accommodating us. Ironically enough, the week before, Hallie and I did a tour of Lankenau, and during that tour, they took us to a special room that they use when you are having multiple, and they said, is anyone expecting twins? And everyone said no. And they said, okay, well, none of you will ever get in this room, but this is, what it looks like, but your room will be much smaller. We got to see that room, as that's where they put us to accommodate what was going on. It was at the end of the L&D floor. It had room for our parents, to be there to help support us. And we joke, it is not how we ever wanted to see that room or use that room, but they were very helpful in making sure we were good, and actually gave us the room next to that so our parents could sleep over, if they so choose, and keep us quiet. They put a sign on the door. I didn't realize it till maybe the second day. It had a black leaf that was falling and had some instructions for anyone entering the room from the medical staff to explain what was going on, to try and avoid saying certain things, or getting caught off guard. But to backtrack to getting that news, and then again being presented with, do you have the C-section or the vaginal? I had no idea. Like, all I'm thinking is, how do I make this stop quicker, and get this over with? And I was talking to my wife, and we were like, do we have the C-section? And the doctor was, saying to us, it is major surgery, and the recovery, and for future pregnancy, if you choose to try again, like, it's much better for the mother if you do a vaginal delivery. And we were like, what does that entail? And Simon alluded, to 30 hours. That was our process. I had called my boss, whose sister-in-law is an OB at the hospital, just to tell him what was going on, and like, I'd be out of communication for the foreseeable future. And I said, if Steph's in the building, can you have her come down? Like, I'd like to talk to her. And I asked her the same question, and asked her to answer it from a medical professional, and then as a mother and a friend. And it was, what do I do? Or what do we do? Do we have a C-section? Do we have a vaginal? And do I get an autopsy? Because the doctor's saying, you might not get answers from the autopsy. And I was like, do we want to put Maya through that? And she answered, both as a medical and as a friend, to have the vaginal delivery and not to do the autopsy. And that's what we decided to do. And we started that process immediately thereafter. But while you're going through that, as a father, you're trying to console your wife, and you're asking yourself why, and how does this happen, and what did we do, or did we do anything? And our therapist said, unless you were a drug addict, there's nothing you did to cause this. But it's still hard. You think about everything you did leading up to it the day before. How did we get here? Is my past getting back at me for something I did, growing up? Is God coming after me because, I might not have been the best son, or, a gentleman? You just start like going down that rabbit hole of why, like, and it's one of those things that, like, you just can't get an answer to. But
Yeah, we had the exact same kind of thought process, Matt. It was like April said, oh, did I accidentally have a sandwich with processed meat, the cold cuts? I thought, oh, did I let April get too close to me after I was painting the porch, and the fumes off of that, and there's so many other things. But I remember when they gave us the news, they informed us that we'd have to make a decision as to how the baby would be delivered. And I think it was at that point I remember, my stoicism kicking in, because at that point I realized my wife has to go through this. What must she, I can't imagine for one moment what she's going through, knowing that she's going to give birth to a baby that's not going to be, alive, we're not going to hear the cries when it comes out. And I think it was at that point then that, you know, you made reference to being the strong husband, you know, father figure, and it was at that point then that I think that kicked in, and I was more interested in looking out for her whilst grieving, but still focusing on her to try and give her everything, because what she was going through, I just was so wanted to swap places with her and not have her go through that.
Yeah.
Could
For
I
sure.
interrupt with a couple questions, please?
Sure.
Absolutely.
So first, I want to comment on the guilt. I think, you know, I said in the first webinar, I've been working with grieving parents and supporting grieving parents for a very, very long time. And I find that the guilt is universal. At least I knew with mothers. But again, we're all here because we don't necessarily know what fathers experience. So it's interesting to know that you both, you know, had some thoughts about guilt, you know, painting the porch, etc.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And I want to just go back to the beginning of the getting the news, particularly for Matt, because you and Hallie were in the hospital. Now, when you went into triage or labor and delivery or wherever, you know, you were first seen, did the nurse try to hear Maya's heartbeat with a fetal monitor?
So we got to Langenau. It was between 7 and 8 o'clock at night. We went through emergency. They moved her very quickly up to not labor and delivery, but I guess the triage for OB. I ended up valeting the car. Like, we didn't, like, you just pull up and like I threw keys at someone and was like, I don't know how long I'm gonna be. It turned out to be 2.5 days. It snowed while we were there. We had no idea. But they brought in, I think it was a resident, and they did the ultrasound, and that's when I knew, you know, where we were headed as she was searching. And then it was bringing in the, you know, fellow, and then it's another doctor to confirm. And, you know, when they're leaving and saying, I'm going to go get another doctor, I had said to Simon, like, it's literally like what you see on TV shows, or you hear like, and here it is playing out. Like, you don't think it's ever going to be, hold on, I can't find it, but let me go get like the heart whisperer. And someone like said, like, there's someone here who's really good
Yeah.
finding the heartbeat. And I'm like, are we really playing the Grey's Anatomy right now? Like, this is literally off TV. So yeah, it was, you know, 2 or 3 doctors. And I think the fellow had said, I'm really sorry, but I'm just not seeing what I want to. And I think Hallie said, what does that mean? And I might have like just blurted it out, like, there's no heartbeat. Like, you know, and sometimes you hear the mother's heartbeat and like you have hope, but you know, it just was that whole process. And then we spent probably 45 minutes or so in that room, and maybe an hour, you know, hysterical, and our parents got there, and then they moved us down to L&D. But yeah, it was, you know, everything you hope it's not going to be, it was. But the staff was great, you know, but it's just one of those things. There's no good way to go
There's
about
no
it.
good way. Yeah. And they do that multiple
Chicken
check.
farm.
Well, in a teaching hospital, they need to do that.
Yeah.
But in any situation, it sort of eliminates the question, like, are you sure?
Yeah.
You know, because people wonder, like, how can you be sure?
Yeah.
The other question I wondered about for both of you is, you know, of course, everybody jumps to support the mother. What kind of support was directed your way as fathers?
It was interesting, if I can just jump in there. It was interesting being, you know, looking at it retrospectively, of course, it was interesting that we were staffed by a team of nurses that were either first-hand experienced in having their own loss, or for some crazy reason, you know, they volunteered and had, you know, a long history of working in that unit. And I must admit, when I heard those nurses say, "Oh yeah, I've not had a loss myself, but I volunteer to work in this because they need people, and they need people, those kind of characters, to do that." And it's one of those instances where I just say, well, you know, God bless you. You know, what you do is must be so hard, but the fact that you volunteer to do this is takes a special kind of person. And those are the people that I feel as though we got the most empathy, we got the most support and assistance from, particularly when it came to decision making. The doctor, so even though I feel as though the doctor fired, it was the nurses staffing them, and obviously you see those on a more regular basis, you know, through this whole process. And they were good at, even when a doctor would give us the information and say you need to make a decision, they would be very good at guiding us through that decision, because the doctors would be reluctant to lead us down a path, but the nurses would say, and it is depending upon what it is that they're asking you, but obviously one of the biggest decisions is natural or cesarean, and you know, do you want to see the baby afterwards, or do you just want it taken away? You know, and the process is, do you want, you know, to cremate, and all the other decisions that go alongside that. They were really good at providing that empathy and that support. And there was one of the nurses who at one point, you know, when I left the room, obviously made a beeline for me and said, "Don't forget, you need help as well. You know, everybody's focused on the mother, and naturally so, but you need help as well. So anytime you want to talk, anytime, you know, and we'll keep an eye out for you as well. You know, you're both going through this together, but naturally there's always that focus on the mother," which I think is right and, you know, natural. But that I was really pleased with, you know. Like I say, retrospectively at the time, you know, it didn't really register with me that much, but that was good.
Yeah. I think the doctors stayed very much matter of fact. And the nursing and support staff and counselor were really who we leaned on during, you know, the process and the time. And we had one specific nurse, her name's April. We still keep in touch with her, who literally was our guardian angel. She stayed with us the entire time, for the 2.5 days. I think she might have even worked like on time off or whatnot. She didn't want to leave while we were there. And she literally got us through this. But they definitely, you know, medically have to take care of the mother, but they made sure that, you know, I understood what was going on, and, you know, could ask questions, and made me feel like I wasn't completely insane. You know, I did lean on my friend who worked at the hospital in the OB, and my father's a doctor, so I'm sure he was in the background having medical conversations. But, you know, during that time, it was, you know, trying to make sure Hallie was not losing her mind. And, you know, like Simon said, you know, you think about what's going to come. And in my head, I'm like, I want to take pictures. I never want to forget what she looks like, you know, and then on my head, I'm going, am I absolutely nuts? I want to take pictures of my dead child. And like, who would want to do that? And then the nurse is like, most people, and you feel normal again. But like, I'm thinking I'm nuts, all the things I want to like do in that limited time. And we will discuss that in the 4th session. But, you start thinking about all of that, like, what's going to happen? Like, I get a very short window to be with my daughter. And during that window, I'm caring and making sure my wife's okay. And I'm absolutely, destroyed. And it's that juggling. I remember, trying to be strong in the room for my wife while she was crying and, consoling each other. And then she would spend time with her parents, and I would literally leave the room and break out in the hallway with my parents or with one of the nurses and like, screaming like, why and what did I do and what did we do and why do we deserve this? And, then you go back in the room and you got to put on that face, not that I didn't cry in front of her, but, I would have my full breakdowns, not in the room because I was afraid what that would do to her.
Hmm.
I remember maybe a month after or so, my wife Hallie had made a comment like, I thought this would destroy our marriage. And that I found out through groups is something that, people, really it does. And like it either makes you stronger or ends your marriage. And, it was never something that crossed my mind, but it crossed hers. And like to have that burden and weight on her while she's going through all of this, like broke me. So there's all those things like we as dads don't or our husbands don't think about. Maybe we do, some do, but all that extra that's on the mom. It's
Mm.
just, it's crushing.
It's funny, Matt, that we had the 4th anniversary earlier this month of losing Charlotte, and we have a tree that we planted with the aim that we chose this specific tree so it would flower in the first 2 weeks of June. So every time when we had Charlotte's birthday, we would have a flowering tree. Well, we planted it so young that they said it's going to be 4 or 5 years before that tree will actually flower. So we're hoping next year will be the first flowering that we get. But every time Charlotte's birthday comes along, we sip champagne and either read stories or release a balloon and talk about Charlotte. And generally get a little bit drunk, I guess, while we're going through that process, because in drinking the champagne. And this anniversary was the first time that April said to me, she said, I thought I was going to lose you. She said this, the same as what you've just described with Hallie. She says, when we lost Charlotte, I thought, you're not going to stay around. You're going to be so upset. And it was the first time I heard that. And it was like crazy that feels crazy, but I know it makes or breaks couples with respect to that, but it just made us stronger. So
Yeah. And I know, like we talked about last week, like no one talks about this until you're part of the club. I found out one of my parents' closest friends, they have a son who's older than me, but their first or their second child was a little girl. She lived for I think 2 days and passed away, and that destroyed their marriage. But I didn't know why they got divorced or that they had a daughter until I joined the shitty club, and that's again part of why Simon and I are in Unite, but also advocates, because we don't want it to be taboo, and we want people to share their stories and not have to bury their grief. But yeah, it's it's crazy.
I remember reading a quote from a mother who said that she was so angry to know that this club existed, and she didn't know until she became a member.
Mhm.
And why didn't she know about this club? Well, because nobody wants to talk about it. It's too upsetting.
And it is, but we hope to change the stigma around it.
Absolutely.
yes.
And I feel like I need to say something about physicians. Until very recently, 10, 12 years, physicians never had any education on compassionate communication. You know, they're trained to heal. So I understand why sometimes they're standoffish and very, like really businesslike.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you both had, supportive nursing staff who helped you through this time in the hospital.
Yeah.
The physicians mean well, they just don't have the
Oh, I
tools.
speak no ill will nor
No,
word.
no, I know.
I'm
But
just,
they just don't have the tools.
when you compare the two, the doctors stayed very medical, and it was the nurses, the caregivers, the counselor that, were there for us on an empathetic level. And we talk about sympathy and empathy in our groups a lot, and the difference. And we always say our one nurse, April, was the most empathetic. Like she got down on our level. And that's the people we surround ourselves with now in our social, settings, and our friends and our family. And, we'll talk about what happens, in later sessions with that. But I know there was a question posed to us earlier about how did we share communication or share the news, and if it was us or if it was our wife. For us, I shared it via text or a phone call. In some cases, to our very close family and friends, we let them know prior to Maya being born that we lost the baby. But I did send out a birth announcement that Maya was born after the fact, and I'll talk more about that, but it was all me. Not taking credit for it, but Hallie just couldn't even bring herself to type those words or say those words. I had to call her employer at the time and let her know that we were out. Don't even try and call us, don't expect any response, and we'll check in in a week with what our plan is going to be. She took the full 3-month leave. But at that point she was, she could barely, do anything. I don't think either of us ate for days in the hospital, and the staff literally forced us to eat food because they were like, you're going to go through labor, like you need to have energy for this. But I think most days the lights were off in the room. Hallie didn't even want to, have lights on. And like I said, I made the joke, like it snowed. We had no idea that it snowed, for the day and a half, 2 days that we were in the hospital. But telling friends and family was one of the hardest things. I think I rewrote the text multiple times before I hit send, and then just copy and pasted it.
Yeah, it was very much the same, I think, in that the initial aftermath. We didn't have any clothes with us, we didn't have anything, and in getting that news, I think one of the first, I did a telephone call to April's mum, who eventually she came over and picked stuff up that we needed from the house. It was a telephone call to my mum, and then some texts to other people. I think I called April's best friend at the time, and then texted a few others, much the same as you, Matt. Wrote it God knows how many times until eventually, just sent it, and then did copy paste on numerous occasions. But some of that was further down the line. The initial telephone calls were just too much, so it was maybe a day later when some of those texts started going out. So
yeah, I was at a business meeting, a networking event in Center City, which is where we live, and Hallie was doing the kick count while I was sitting listening to a speaker, and we were texting, and there wasn't too much urgency in her text, and she's like, I got to do this for an hour anyway, just stay at the event, and when it's over, we'll figure it out. And I remember as the event was still going, she had gotten to that end of hour and hadn't felt a kick. And that's when the urgency started kicking in. I left and had to get my car out of a garage, and like it was valet. And I remember like waiting for the car to come down the ramp. And I called my dad, being a doctor, and I was like, do we go to, Pensy or, Jefferson, which is closer? Do we go to Lankenau on the main line, that's 25 minutes away, but it's our hospital and our team's there? And he said, go there, your team's there, but like then having to call Hallie's parents after they told us, and like literally saying we lost the baby, and like hearing her mom scream, and like then calling my parents again, and being like they were on alert, and I probably headed on their way, but telling them like it happened, we lost the baby. It's the hardest phone calls I've made.
Yeah.
But just hard, like I can hear it in my head, like I can play it all back.
You saying that just replayed the sound my mum made when I told her.
Yeah.
And it certainly changes your perspective, in terms of, we were, as we said at the other session, we were very naive, full of expectations, no kind of thoughts that things would go along, even to the extent that, 3-4 months earlier, these letters that are above my head stand for the initials of our family, and the first letter being Charlotte, the baby that we lost. Then April, Simon, and Amber, April's first child, who's now 21. And the little H in the love heart is our rainbow baby, Harper. But I remember buying these letters thinking, oh, this would be great. It makes the letter, we decided on the name Charlotte so many months in advance. And these letters, spell out casa, which is home in Spanish, I believe. And we would, to then get that news, that the whole thing fell apart. And eventually we decided to keep the letters and keep that up there as the reminder. And, the little bear is a bear that was in our room when we were eventually ushered, after getting the news, ushered up to the labour and delivery room, and that bear was in a basket with a bunch of other material provided by an organisation called A Day with Chase, where that family had gone through a similar experience of losing a child, and so it had that support material that was in there, and in the in the guise of Charlotte, the little bird's called Charlie. So that's our, it's not a constant reminder, we don't need a reminder, but it's more of a, Charlotte's still in our life and we still remember her, and so that's how we observe that. And I know there's many other people in our position who have similar stories, talking about tattoos, butterflies, reminders in the home, that help us because nobody else wants to speak about it. And all we're interested in is hearing the name of our, the child that we've lost. So, sorry, went at a tangent there, but.
That's okay.
We're proud papas.
Yes.
Yeah. I
All right.
have, I'm flashing back to something that happened a couple of years ago. With the whole George Floyd tragedy that they, and some other, other people who had been killed, they said, say her name. And so, Simon, when you said you just want to hear Charlotte's name, we need to remember that we should use her name. We should use Maya's name because they were here and they counted and they're part of your families forever.
And I think that's one of the one of the things we'd already picked a name, and I know there's other people who are not in that position, you know, and don't decide until after the baby is, you know, stillborn or whatever the circumstances are, where they don't choose a name. But one of the recommendations is that you have a name, because then it gives you that focus, and without the name, I think it leads to a further, you know, void in your heart, that, you know, if you don't have that. So we already had a name, but people say, you know, we were told, we were encouraged, you know, to have that name, and so that, you know, in future when we're remembering her, we have that focus. I think for the most part, a lot of people, you know, don't need that encouragement, but there are a few that I've come across during our experience, you know, where people haven't had a name, and they'll then choose a name, whether it's Angel or something like that, to you know, accommodate that. So
When we were planning this, I reached out to the bereavement task force and said, you know, we're thinking of doing this webinar. We thought it was only one at the time. What would you like to know about fathers and perinatal loss? And so we do have some questions that'll come up in this session and in subsequent sessions that were previously submitted. Do you have, Matt and Simon, do you have any?
I definitely, one was, so one I
Sure.
used, which was, how did we tell people and who? The other was, you know, was there anything that was said or done that was or was not helpful? And I alluded to it, you know, letting us know that we're not crazy for wanting to spend time with our child, or take pictures, you know, or planning for what was going to happen after they were delivered. And that was, you know, really helpful. We had a counselor come and speak to us, just, you know, on an emotional level, nothing medical, you know. We're Jewish, so we weren't looking for like the chancellor or, you know, anything like that. But there was a counselor, a therapist that came and spoke with us. And we actually still keep in touch with her as well, just because how wonderful she was. So providing those types of resources, you know, from the start and then through the process, you know, is really helpful. Making someone feel comfortable, or that they're not insane during the worst, you know, for us was big. Because again, I thought it was a ludicrous idea that I would take pictures with a dead baby. But I look at them often. I actually have 3 pictures on my desk that I talk to every morning, and I say good morning to mine. It's a picture of the 3 of us, the picture of her and I, and then a picture of her holding my finger. And when I left my office in COVID, it came home with me. And now that I'm going to start working back in my office a couple days a week, I will replicate, like have prints made and put that on that desk as well, because it's something I do every day. But, you know, making sure that there's someone for us to talk to and ask questions and help on an emotional state, as well as the medical, was really helpful for us.
yeah, I would add to that, Matt, in terms of, you know, when it comes to the decision-making process, you know, try and have recommendations, try and lead to what would perhaps be the, you know, the thing that people want the most. Like, for instance, April was really, at the time, she found it too painful, you know, thinking about pictures and what, and having that time with the baby. Now she looks back upon it and thinks, I wish I had more. We did have pictures. We did have some time with Charlotte. You know, we had around a day, and it was, and then having to make the decisions, not have them in such a fashion as, do you want A or B, but you know, do you want A or B? We would recommend B because of this, and people's experience in the past. You know, it seems to be the way that people go. Again, building upon what Matt was saying with regards to having that opportunity to understand that the decision that you're making and perhaps the way that you want to go is not something that's crazy, because who would want to have, you know, pictures of a dead baby? And it's something that we look back upon and we're so grateful that we had at that time. Similarly, so with I think I would add to that in terms of having the people who work in labour and delivery, and particularly those that might be exposed, you know, to these unfortunate circumstances, because again, it's 1 in 4. It's a crazy statistic. Is making sure that the people who man that, you know, have that kind of understanding that one day they'll be in that circumstance, whether it's, you know, the lead nurse, you know, the leader of that section, a social worker, you know, the anesthesiologist, you know, whoever's, you know, in that area are expected to work. I feel it would be useful, and maybe predicating something that already takes place, but it's useful for them to be aware of these circumstances and perhaps have that, you know, that kind of training, or at least heads up that, by the way, we'll have this, and in these circumstances, this is, you know, what we need to take into account when we're dealing with those people.
There are 2 questions in the chat. So the first, in regards to someone helping, we had a counselor, a grief counselor specifically from the hospital, come in and help us through the process. So it wasn't a social worker, but she was a grief counselor and practices that both for the hospital, and then she does it privately as well. So that was really helpful, and we've stayed in touch. And that kind of dovetails into the second question. Yeah, I would definitely recommend that the providers or the hospital continue to stay in touch. I don't know if Jamie, who did it, who was our counselor, did it based on the bond we made, or it was what her job was, but she did stay in touch with us regularly. And we, to this day, still keep in touch, but not as, it's more social and friendly. But she always asks her, you know, reaches out on Maya's birthday, things like that. But the more support that the community and the medical professionals, counselors can provide, the better, which is why Simon and I both immediately, and our wives, joined Unite for the grief support. And I was going to 3 meetings a week, or 3 meetings a month, which is uncommon. You normally join 1 chapter. We were doing 3 in addition to weekly private counseling. But definitely the more support, especially in the beginning, because we do all feel very alone until you find your community, and that, you know, shitty group that none of us wanted to join, but thank God it's there, you know, is beneficial. So if providers can provide that emotional, you know, support, it's definitely beneficial,
Or at least offer it.
Yeah, not everyone wants it.
Yeah, some people,
Yeah.
you know, want to leave the scene of the crime behind them and
Right.
don't want to hear from anybody
Yeah,
at the hospital or their doctor's office or midwife or whatever.
yeah,
To, you know, to each his own, but offer.
Yeah.
like I remember Hallie, when we got home, the first thing she did, like, was read through all the brochures and the information that they give you, and I was banging the phone trying to get, you know, someone from Unite and find other groups like that we could join, and like find our therapist who experienced her own loss 40, no, her daughter Greta would be 50 years ago. So, you know, it's one of those things, like the more support you can get in the beginning or give, the better. We are literally lost, which is again why Simon and I do it, for, you know, to have the opportunity to help others pay it forward, also keep our daughters, you know, memories alive. but someone led us down the path, and now like I want to help as many other parents and dads as I can. And I know Simon feels the same way,
Yeah.
someone helped us through it.
And thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to end our session today. We are at 12:59. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, taking a little piece of your day out to spend with us.